Hey Chat Matters, welcome back to our fourth episode of Chat Mat. Today we have an amazing episode featuring Miss Conger from moonprep.com. And we're going to be discussing a lot of interesting topics such as like the college admissions process, which is completely sometimes foreign to a lot of our younger viewers. And we'll just get you ready for the future issues you're going to face and get you ready for college pretty much. So now grades and essays, another thing we're going to talk about. So let's start. We're here with my co-host Ryan Singh.
Hi, my name is Ryan Singh. I'm really excited to be here, and especially with our special guest, Ms. Conger. I'm really glad you could come here and tell us about your tips for everything. So, before I keep on talking, can you please introduce yourself?
For sure. So my name is Lindsay Conger. I'm an independent college counselor at Moon Prep, and we focus on college admissions, but more specifically on BSMD direct medical admissions as well. So helping students from as young as freshman year, or sometimes a little bit before freshman year, all the way through the college application process. So that means we're focusing on kind of what you guys talked about earlier: grades, extracurriculars. Essay writing, of course, is a big one come senior year. The college list is going to be a big one too. Just making sure that they are feeling 100% ready to go for the BSMD admissions and traditional application process.
Yeah, that's pretty much we're chat med for a reason, all about medical. And we don't want to scare our viewers. We'll have a little variety as well. So thank you once again, Ms. Conger, for coming and sharing your insight and expertise. And I'm sure all of our viewers and listeners are definitely going to take a lot away from this episode, and they'll be able to kind of plan for their future and kind of allocate the resources at an earlier age so they can set themselves up for better success. So let's start with our first topic of the day, college admissions. So that's kind of a big bubble to address. There's a lot that is in that. So for my question would be, could you give us like a brief overview of like kind of the process of applying, like from like start to finish?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I'll do more of like the traditional overview of what it typically starts with. So a lot of kids don't really start thinking about it until maybe junior year if they're really on top of it. Senior year for a lot of our students. But the first kind of step is, of course, to decide where you want to go to college. And that one's a work in progress. I've had students, the last deadlines are obviously still going on for this application cycle, and some students are still adding schools, taking schools off. So it's a never ending process until you can't apply anymore. And so that's kind of the first thing. And I think we'll talk about that at length later on as well. But, the key to a successful college admissions, especially if you're going for a competitive school, if it's an Ivy League, if it's, NYU or University of Chicago or a BSMD program, is starting early. The biggest gift you can give yourself is the gift of time, and time goes away really quick with college admissions. I think I saw for like the January 1st deadline, or I can't remember which deadline it was, but there was more applications sent in at 11:59 that final minute. Those applications probably weren't as good because you're rushing, you're like, kind of going through it. So really starting early, thinking about the essay writing process, everything from A to Z, from letters of recommendations to, of course, your like activity list, your supplemental essays. There's a lot of different moving parts that take more time than you think they're going to take. You might see a 150-word essay and you're like, I can crank that out in 5 minutes. Yes, you can, but will it be a good essay? Probably not. So that's why really the gift of time is the biggest piece of advice. Starting early is key.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I'm only a sophomore right now, but it's not too far away, the application process, but it's a lot to take in. And yeah, like you have to get good quality essays, and I wouldn't be able to write it in 5 minutes either. So, and if I did, it would probably be like not the best. So, going off from that, we heard Moon Prep specializes in BSMD or joint medical programs.
Mhm.
So like BSDO, BSMD, like it keeps on going on. So I wanted to ask, can you please give a brief overview? What are these programs to our listeners? And like, can you explain like the application process and like the essays you encounter with these programs?
For sure, yes. So BSMD is a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more particular than just traditional applications. There's definitely a lot of more moving parts. And once again, it takes a lot more time to apply to BSMD than a traditional program. But essentially, I'll start from the beginning. A BSMD, direct medical, BSDO, BAMD, like, there's a ton of different names for it. You can sometimes even see like early assurance programs. These all allow you to apply in high school to a medical school. So you're essentially assuring your spot in a medical school at 16, 17, 18 years old, however old you might be when you're applying. So it's quite a good gift because a lot of times you don't have to take the MCAT, or you might just have to get a minimum score in the MCAT. You have to maintain a certain GPA, sometimes 3.5, 3.7 in college. Of course, like hitting the different requirements, whatever they might be for the classes, because of course you'll need prereqs for medical school. But overall, it's a pretty good deal for students like yourselves who are interested in, are positive that they want to pursue a career in medicine, just because applying to medical school is time consuming, as I'm sure you guys know, or if started to figure out. It's expensive, it's time consuming, it takes years of effort to really build a strong profile. So you can avoid that by, doing it in high school.
Yeah. So through our past episodes, we talked to many medical students about their kind of like their perspective, whether students young as us should kind of already narrow ourselves during that tunnel just to come out as a doctor, because one of the biggest things is commitment, time commitment. 7 to 8 years just to education is very important to become a doctor. So could you give us a little bit in your experience, how can students like us kind of gauge, hey, it's 7 to 8 years investment of education. Will I be able to kind of survive and go through that and stay focused? Or should I take kind of a path where I have the option to exit whenever I can?
Yeah, that's a really important point for high school students to think about, because it is, very obvious to us too when it's like a very parent-driven BSMD kind of thing, where the parents are pushing the kids down this path and they might not really be 100% committed to that. And so that's why whenever we're working with students at Moon Prep, is that we're really trying to make sure they get on as many hands-on opportunities as possible. Because I'm sure for you guys, like whenever you first decided you wanted to be a doctor, you were probably like super young. You're like, oh, this seems like a great career. You see the doctor, you play doctor with like, not for you guys, maybe your dolls, but those kind of things. And it's like a childhood dream. And for BSMD admissions to be successful and to really commit, as you're saying, it has to become more than a dream. It has to become, we have to understand the hard work that goes into being a doctor, because it's not easy. And so, there's going to be a lot of, hard days and bad days, and a lot of negative parts about being a doctor. And so it is important that a student kind of sees that through, shadowing physicians, which of course is hard during a pandemic. Working in hospitals, once again, kind of hard in a pandemic. But, just trying to see the backside of being a doctor, so that you really do understand that it is worth that 8-year commitment, even though there are going to be hard days, that it is going to be worth it when you help that family, when you help that child, whoever it might be. And so that's why it is really important and why BSMD admissions does take so long to really prepare for, because applying to work in a hospital can sometimes, or volunteer in a hospital can take time to do that, or in a nursing home or wherever it might be. That all takes time to really understand that you're committed to it. Shadowing is another thing that takes time. A lot of our students who are BSMD choose to do research, whether it's, more clinical research or, in a lab research. That can take a whole summer too. So of course, research isn't 100% necessary for BSMD admissions. I have many students, especially this year, who've never stepped foot in a lab, like outside of AP Chem or whatever it might be. But they have never gotten that experience, and that's completely okay. But just like, making sure that we do understand every aspect of the medical field is super important as you're going through this BSMD process, because it's a long, application process, because like we said, you're applying to medical school and undergraduate one. You're applying 2 places at once. So I realized as I was talking, I didn't answer your earlier question about what really the application entails, and the essays are going to be a huge part of it. And one of the things that we do work with our seniors really early on is kind of like that why doctor essay. It can't just be like, the majority of it can't be about that childhood fancy, because what makes you different from anyone else? So we really want to dig deep and make sure we're drawing on those experiences. So whenever we're writing, if you have to write 500 words on it, that's a lot of words. It's a lot of time to talk about your experiences from volunteering, from shadowing, maybe from research. And so that's where your experiences can really, really shine. And that's like almost like a mini personal statement, because it's really showcasing this really important part of you in this essay. So the personal statement's of course really important, but the why doctor for applying to BSMD is almost just as important, to make sure that they really see that commitment, and not only commitment, maturity, which can be hard, as you're kind of saying, for younger students to achieve. And so we really do try and make sure that students are showcasing those qualities in themselves, through their application, through their interviews, through their activities.
Yeah, definitely. I think you mentioned a lot of great points, such as the shadowing and just getting as much clinical per se, like exposure for students, so they know, hey, 7-10 years now, this is what I want to do. And
Mhm.
the hardest, you also mentioned the hardest part of this, such as most of like our students now in this kind of pandemic time, is getting that like sense, is this field really there? So that's a tough thing all of us have to kind of
Mhm.
just persevere through. And I know Ryan also, we also all had our different ways of finding medicine and seeing, hey, like for me, it was going to Liberty Science Center and accidentally being volunteered to like do the surgery thing on Mr. Banana. That was like an interesting thing. And I accidentally raised my hand because I was interested. And then after that, I was like, wow, this is actually something interesting. And I'm sure Ryan has the same story like that as well.
Yeah, I have the same story. Like, surprisingly, I was a big army fanatic. I wanted to go to the military when I was younger, actually, to like help with our country, fight for our country, right? And then that's what I wanted to do when I was young. And then it changed when I was biking, and I saw something in the road, and I fell. I broke my tibia, and not broke, fractured my tibia and fibia. It hurt so bad. It felt like 1,000 needles and everything. Then I went to the orthopedic surgeon. He treated me like he sang me Disney songs. He did that, and I was like, it was a spark. I was like, that's what I want to do with my patient. That's what I want to do to someone. And that's what I want to be, because I don't want to sit in, like, for me, I don't like sitting in a desk for 10 hours a day. Personally, for me, I don't like that. Of course there's paperwork as a doctor, but I want to be with my patients. I want to like do surgeries. That's what I want to do.
Mhm. And I think actually what you said, like, you were really into like, pursuing a career in the army. And even like if you were a sophomore and you still had another interest or another like career, like for example, a lot of students do up till junior year, even they're like, oh, I want to do computer science, or oh, I want to do business. And then junior year, they find out actually my interest through summer camps or research or whatever it might be, through shadowing, through an accident, they find out that they want to do medicine. And it's definitely not too late for those students, because you might think, oh, everyone's way ahead of me. They have so many more medical experiences than me. And that's maybe true, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, because your experiences will help you stand out through this BSMD process. Like your personality, your things that you learned can be pivoted to a successful BSMD admissions process. So there's never, it's not too late, as long as you have been productive and doing things you're passionate about for your entire high school career. If you've done nothing, it's a little bit harder. If you haven't done any volunteering, if you haven't done any, clubs or anything like that, it's a little bit harder, but always not impossible. But if you have been doing things deeply and passionately, whatever it is, there's always a way to get into a BSMD program, as long as then you kind of pivot and make sure that you do get at least some of those experiences.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you. And like you said, you want to get experience about what you want to do, not even for the medical career, business and all that. And I saw from your articles, so if you want to check it out, in the Moon Prep articles, you gave lots of like tips and everything for like extracurriculars, and it was great. So I totally recommend that. And um going to like the next topic, we talked about, like you said, you're specialized in BSMD programs, and like outside of BSMD programs, like the honors colleges, scholarships, all these, there's interviews, right? And not even for these other stuff relating to the application. We just talked the normal applications. I heard there's sometimes the optional interview. So I wanted to ask, so if it's optional, would you recommend doing it? And if you're actually applying to like the honors colleges, BSMD programs, what are some tips you would give for these interviews?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, optional, unfortunately, never really means optional in in college admissions. And that kind of also falls along the line of our advice for SAT, ACT. If you can take it and do well, submitting it will just strengthen your application. And so same thing for interviews, especially if it's like an alumni interview or a student interview. A lot of the times it's not so much how you do in the interview, but just the fact that you did the interview. The alumni, the student, really, you can bomb it and do pretty terrible and still get accepted. It really doesn't have a ton of weight in the application process. And so, of course, that doesn't mean to like show up and be like super casual and like disrespectful. Like as long as you're showing up as like a normal human being, you'll be totally fine. For student and alumni interviews, those are more casual. But for more like honors college, those BSMD interviews, those definitely are taken up a notch. Those are usually with faculty or with admissions officers, you know, those type of people who actually do have a say in your application. And so we're doing interview prep with our students, our BSMD students right now. It seems late, but interview season is right now going on in, you know, February, even March through March. And so what we tell our students is like, you're already qualified. They looked at your resume, they liked what they saw. You don't need to worry at this point. Actually, it's more of a personality contest. They want to see why they should pick you over someone else. And so being personable, showcasing your accomplishments, showcasing who you are is going to be more important. And honestly, practice is key in this again. As I'm sure you guys have noticed from like doing podcasts, the first one, maybe the nerves were a lot higher, and as like you've gone along and like further and further, it's gotten easier. And the same thing is true for interview prep. The first time you do it, it's going to be rough, and that's why it is important to practice your answers. To be honest, like the hardest one often is like the tell me about yourself question. That first question you get asked, like how much information do you get? Do you tell them everything? Like what should you tell them? And so, you know, we try and advise students to be a little bit more casual with this, like to try and crack a joke if they can. It can be challenging. So that's why kind of like preparing it beforehand, especially those questions you kind of know are going to come up, having that tell me about yourself ready to go. And, you know, being able to talk about each and every item on your resume in depth, you know, ultimately, like be able to talk about it for like 2 minutes or so for each one. Because I mean, if I were to ask you about a certain thing on your resume, you'd probably be able to come up with an answer on the spot. But if I were to ask you like, you know, why you wanted to attend like Union College, honors college, you might be like, I don't know, like what's more specific. That's not something you can make up on the spot. So it is really important before you go into interviews to do your research, to be looking up why you want to go to the honors college, why you want to go to the BSMD program, why you want to go to the school in general, how you're going to contribute. Like all these things are super important to research beforehand, because you can't make that up on the spot and you're going to look a little foolish if you don't have a good answer. And so that's what we honestly work with our students the most. And then secondary is kind of what questions they're going to then ask the interviewer. So it's not a one-way street. A lot of the times the interview and what makes COVID adds another wrench into the process, because in real, you know, for BSMD, a lot of times for even honors college, sometimes you'll be going to those interviews in person. You're going to see the campus. They do their little presentations. They're also trying to sell you on the school, and you're trying to sell, you know, yourself to them too. So it's like kind of a two-way street here. Everyone has to agree to the process moving forward. And so that's been the hardest part for our seniors last year and our current seniors, is they didn't get to visit a lot of these schools. So in May, they're kind of making a choice based off of internet and like research and like trying to say, would this school be a good fit for me? Because you're not going to visit every school on your list. And so that's kind of been the hardest, I think, part for our seniors. Hopefully for you guys as sophomores, you'll be able to visit, you'll be able to go. But, you know, a lot of it is seeing the school, seeing that interaction. But I sidetracked it a bit, because the interview questions you ask the interviewer is going to be really important. So preparing, you know, intelligent ones, not just like asking things you could look on Google, is something that we really spend a lot of time with our students on, having 5 questions ready to go, so that, you know, if they do have that time, if they have 5-10 minutes for just questions, you're not saying, no, I don't have any questions, like everything I understand. No, you should always have questions. So that's always a really important part. And then the last tip is sending a thank you note at the end. It's something simple, something small. Just like, having it be personalized. Don't just say like, thanks for your time, let me know if you need any more information, and then that's it. Like, try and bring a little bit of the interview in there. Like you mentioned XYZ from the question I asked you. I looked into it more. It's super interesting. Whatever it might be from the interview, try and make it personal to show, once again, maturity, that you're interested in whatever they had to talk about, that you pay attention. Those kind of things are just like little simple things to be doing throughout this process. And if you do want more interview prep, actually, we have free classes, and this is kind of overarching to a lot of different things, but on our website we have a lot of resources. On the Moon Prep website, we have a lot of resources, like for the college essay, we've got a 55-page ebook on that. We have free online courses on writing the college essay, the personal statement, writing supplemental essays. We have one on scholarships as well. We have one on interview prep. So watching these things and kind of getting our advice on how to answer these questions can be super helpful to students, and it's all free. You just have to go on our website essentially, and there's a ton of information about how to make a balanced college list. Anything you kind of need throughout this process, we've put up there just to kind of help students throughout that kind of process too.
Yeah, you mentioned one thing about the going to the schools and seeing, hey, is this the right fit from us? And a lot of the our listeners may have listened to our other episodes. A lot of our college students, we also ask, that is a very important thing they express to us as well, making sure you're comfortable in those environments, because those environments are the places you will have to learn a lot, right? And especially for BSMD joint programs, you're going to be there that'll be like your second home, new home. So as comfortable you're here, you have to be comfortable there. So now I want to get into, before I go off in all about the college campuses and stuff, because they are truly amazing buildings and resources we have to leverage, is kind of grades, right? Grades are significant for students like ourselves, especially going to these very competitive schools and programs. We need to maintain our grades and kind of keep a standard of excellence, like I like to say, in our grades, right? How can we like make sure we're keeping that standard of excellence?
Yes. So I like to tell my students that grades and GPA, or GPA, SAT, ACT score, are kind of like the gatekeepers into the BSMD admissions world. Not for every program, but for a lot of the programs, especially like more of the second tier programs. As long as you're hitting those guidelines, you don't need to have a 4.0 GPA. Students have had much lower than a 4.0 GPA and still getting into a BSMD program. So I do a lot of like our new client calls with families, and some of them will mention like, okay, we had a B in AP chemistry. Like, is that going to be okay? Absolutely, it's going to be okay. Because the rest of your application will shine. 1B isn't going to be the reason why you don't get into a BSMD program. And so having a rigorous course load is going to be important, though. That being said, you don't want to just take regular physics because you want to maintain a 4.0 GPA, rather than challenging yourself and taking, honors physics or AP physics. Making sure that you are taking advantage of the STEM honors or STEM AP classes at your school is going to be super important. But as you guys know, AP classes, honors classes, are time consuming. And so you do have to balance it out. You don't have to take every single AP. If you have no interest in history is not your thing, skip APUSH. It's okay. Just because everyone else is taking it, it's okay, because it ultimately isn't going to play a huge factor in your future. It's more important to focus your energies on your extracurriculars and your STEM AP classes. That being said, if you love history, take APUSH. Like, that's okay too. But you don't have to feel like you have to take every single AP and honors class at your school just because everyone else is doing it. If it has nothing to do with what you're interested in, skip it. And so that's something that we really do advise our students, like thinking about what they're passionate about in their extracurriculars, in their grades, is really important. And so actually this I forgot to mention this when I was talking about the things on our website, but on our website too, we have a complete list of all the BSMD programs. And so you can download it and see what the average like GPA is, what the minimum requirements are for the programs. And just so you can kind of start to plan ahead and see what kind of opportunities are available there too. Because there are a lot more programs than you might think. And, you might be intimidated thinking, I've got a 3.7 GPA, I'll never be able to get in. It's definitely not true. There's a lot of programs at the minimum requirements at 3.5, some that are even a 3.0, and it is always possible. So grades are important, but it's not the be all end all, because your extracurriculars are also where you shine and where you stand out.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like for me, I can't like I can't like say my teacher teaches this. I can't be like, I'm ready for the test. I got to study. I'm like book smart. I have to study really hard for the test and that. And even though I'm not going to say like I'm the smartest. Of course I'm not the smartest. I have good grades in some classes. I have decent grades in others. And I know that some kids are excelling in classes, some are not doing the best, but I feel like, in my opinion, like you said, the guidelines, you meet that, they think you're qualified already with those guidelines. And what I like to say, like, a grade doesn't define who you are as a person. In my opinion, like if I was trying to pick someone, I'll pick someone with their personality and is like eligible to like handle these courses too. So that's what I feel like goes into like the application process and that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we've done a lot of interviews with BSMD admissions officers and like competitive counselors and everything like that. And of course, they're like, grades are important. But, same thing as what we were saying before. Ultimately, extracurriculars are where you shine, where you stand out. Other students will have similar grades, similar test scores. And so one interview we did kind of recently was with TCNJ, the College of New Jersey, their BSMD program. And he did say, he was like, if push comes to shove and two students, we cannot differentiate between them. He's like, if one got like a 1300, well, actually their minimum requirement's like a 1500. So I guess a 1500 and like a 1550 on the SAT, maybe we would pick the the higher grade, but that would be kind of like the last difference maker where they couldn't choose between the two because everything else was so similar. So of course it sometimes does matter. I'm not going to say that they are important, but your extracurriculars are ultimately where you'll shine. So doing things that you're passionate about in grades, in your schoolwork, in your extracurriculars is also really important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And our last like subtopic would be we talk about extracurriculars a lot, and I wanted to ask, there's so many extracurriculars you can do for business, architecture, oceanography, and like I heard many people, there's so many careers out there outside of med. So I wanted to ask, med or not, how can we get engaged in these extracurriculars that you're interested in? You can give an example for med if you're interested in these BSMD programs too.
Yes, that's a great question. So one thing that I try and stress to my students first is to think about what they're passionate about. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that is med focused, which seems counterintuitive. Of course, like, you should be still having some med focused things. But for example, and this isn't actually my example, I don't know if you guys have heard about RSI, the Research Science Institute. It's a really competitive summer camp, and we interviewed their summer director. And one of the examples she kind of brought up with like students that she was kind of interested in, that she still remembered, was like a kid who was really into like skateboarding. And so obviously it's not an academic pursuit, and like your parents might have gotten mad at you for skateboarding because it's a waste of time, but for him, he turned this skateboarding into something bigger. So he ended up like, fundraising to like buy skateboards for kids who couldn't afford skateboards. He did like a skateboarding camp for kids in his area who couldn't afford it. And so he turned like his love of skateboarding into something that had impact. And so that's really what we stress for our students, is think about the impact. How can we turn impact? Like so taking a love of tennis and running a camp for people who've never done tennis before. If you love baking, baking for underprivileged kids or whatever it might be, teaching a course. There's a ton of different ways you can be standing out. And something that we've been working with our students a lot too is, if it is doing some like kind of research project too. So looking into like some medical field that you might be interested into. As we talked about before, research is really hard to get right now in the COVID, pandemic. They're not letting 16-year-old kids into labs right now. It's all virtual. And even then, it's a lot of programs have been canceled. It's not the same. And so we've been working a lot with our kids on like, an independent research project, deciding a topic. So for example, I'm working with a direct dental student, and one of the topics he's kind of thinking about pursuing is how smoking can increase dental fear. And so he's going to do surveys, he's going to do research. We're partnering with a local he's working with like a local professor who has done research in this before. So he's not only doing research, he's going to write a paper. He's also getting a mentor. So he's really, starting to form connections in like the professional sense. And then ultimately the goal is to get it published. So, that's a way that you can independently stand out and do kind of med focused research. And so of course, like if your school has like, HOSA or like a research club, like those are always really great to join too. But then always thinking, how can we take interest to the next level is kind of my biggest piece of advice, no matter what the field is, because there's a lot of different ways you could go about doing it.
Yeah, I totally agree. You just get into the field, you explore whatever you're interested in and pick the one you're really passionate about. So I guess you gave so much information, Ms. Conger, and I just want to say thank you so much for coming here. I think we're ending off right here. So before we end off, like what's one key takeaway? I know there's so much stuff you can say in that, but like what is like one key takeaway would you give it to our listeners that's applying to like BSMD honors colleges, any type of thing for like the college admission process?
Ooh, one key takeaway. That's a tough one. Okay. So I think I'm going to go back to my original thing is just starting early. There's no excuse for it to be November 1st at 11:58 at night, and you haven't submitted. The personal statement prompts for the Common App have already been released. And so you can start writing your personal statement if you're a junior right now. That's a 650 word essay that goes to every single college. You can start writing that right now. You can, really evaluate your time, have it transform over the next 6 to 8 months before you're submitting. The students who started in the summer, a lot of theirs were honestly really beautiful, like poetic. Like you could really tell that they thought about each word. And then we had a lot of students who signed up in October for that November 1st deadline, and theirs were more keyboard mashing. Like we were just trying to get everything done in time. And so their essays, to be honest, were not as good, not as beautiful. And so starting things early, if it's with your extracurriculars, if you are a freshman or sophomore listening and you're like, oh, I've got plenty of time, just doing a little thing every summer, every break, starting something. It doesn't have to be big. Things take time. Things take, a while to get momentum. So starting now is honestly key, no matter where you are in high school or even in middle school, an older student in middle school, there's really the best time to start is now, is I think my biggest piece of advice. And there's tons of resources. If your school doesn't have a ton of, a good counselor because there's just too many students or whatever it might be. We do a ton of like free webinars. So you can join like our webinars and ask questions like throughout this entire process. There's always like a lot of resources that you can get for free out there from our website, from, some other Google search. There's going to be a lot of information out there. And so starting now is my biggest piece of advice.
I agree. You mentioned something about getting it done and starting before, and I'm kind of the person that I can't sleep at night if we have an AB schedule. So I need to make sure everything that I got assigned on A day is done before I get stuff with the B day. So for me, I know that when I get those prompts next time, this like probably February of 2022, I'm going to probably get it done as soon as possible. And like you said, thinking about each word, that's something I'm going to take away when I start doing, I'm sure Ryan also, about just being very meticulous about each word and creating, like you said, poetic type of story instead of just like a lecture and just talking, just something that has, like you also mentioned, impact, very important. So those are some things I've taken away. I'm sure Ryan's taken away a lot of things. So in ChatMed fashion, we're going to end off with a little bit of a motivation. And I know Ryan has wonderful motivation quotes. So Ryan, please share your motivation quote for today.
Yeah, so I found one by Dolly Parton. She's a songwriter, a singer. The way I see it, if you want the rainbow, you got to put up with the rain. I feel like this is a very important quote, especially like with my goal. So like the end of the rainbow is probably getting to the BSMD in med school, orthopedic surgery, which I like. And of course, it's not one easy way path all the way there. It's not a straight road. And I'm saying that because there's always going to be bumps in the road, but every time you learn, every time you fail or have mistakes going to that major goal, you learn from those mistakes and failures, and you get even stronger so you don't make those same mistakes and failures. And they're always going to keep on coming and coming, but that's all. These mistakes and failures will just keep on getting you smarter and smarter.
Yeah, and go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was going to say I think that's really beautiful and important for not only high school and like college admissions, obviously, but I think life in general. And so that's another key takeaway. I was thinking about that too, not doing stuff just because you think it will look good on college applications, but kind of what you're saying so that you learn. And so even if you fail, that's okay. And that's kind of the beautiful part of the process.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both of you guys. And you guys said that keeping yourself in check, that you're not only doing it just to get in college. So after you get into college, you won't feel like you wasted that time. It's like Ms. Conger said earlier, the impact again, right? Making sure it has an impact not only on yourself, but on your surrounding and the environment you have and your peers and your community. And that's very important to take away. So mine is a little different, and it's from Mark Cuban. So if you guys don't know Mark Cuban, he was from the broadcast.com back in during that bubble, and he is the owner of Dallas Mavs, the Mavericks. So his quote is, "Work like there's someone working 24 hours a day to take it all away from you." And I think this is very important because this just makes he has an extraordinary work ethic. And I'm sure Ryan also has that, and I'm sure you also have that too. And we like to work as much as we possibly can to make sure we can get to our dreams. And same way for BSMD and stuff, we want to put our 100% best effort and try to study as much, not too much, but quality is what I like to say. Having the quality, because at the end of the day, if you're studying, you have your textbook open, but you're scrolling through TikTok. We're not sponsored by TikTok, but I wish we were. So if you're scrolling through TikTok and you just have the book open, it's not magically going to download into your brain. So that's my quote for today. Ryan, you can kind of wrap it up today.
Yeah, I totally agree. Quality over quantity. And you always before we end off right now, I just want to say work-life balance is really important. You always need that half. You work hard, but you also need that life balance. Because I know for myself, you put me on a desk for 3 hours, I'm gonna end up in the bed and pass out for 5 hours straight. That's what. So I have to get every 2 hours. I need a 10-minute break to get my mind off everything. So we're ending off here. I just want to say thank you again, Ms. Conger, again, with all these great tips, all these takeaways. And I took so many notes during this session, and I bet our listeners are taking a lot of notes too for the future. So before we end off, please check out Moon Prep. They have so many free resources. From what you said, Ms. Conger, you have all these resources you can use for interviews, extracurriculars, and the list keeps on going on. And you have a tutoring service, college counseling service, right? Mm-hmm. So yep. Please check them out. I'm gonna pop them up right here, their website and their email. So check them out. And and also before we end, please check out our organization, Let's Go Learning. We try to teach the youth, encourage the youth with their dreams, and tutor them with their subjects and that. So please check that out too. So thank you again, Ms. Conger, like I said, with all the great tips. And before we end up, I just want to say, please keep on working hard to achieve these goals and these future endeavors. And that's really it. Thank you. Have a great day.